And so there's a consistency. This is a Roman building. Now, Jews were not happy with Herod. They did not trust him. Why? Because if they did, he wouldn't have decided to bring together all of the workmen and all the materials necessary to rebuild the temple before he even started. Right? According to Josephus. He was building a Roman temple. That post facto, everybody liked it, is great, but it's not clear as he was building this Roman temple for Jewish usage that that was going to be the case. And here's another one, a small temple in Croatia, just to give you a sense of what an Augustus temple looks like. So, in the year 70, the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed. You're looking at the retaining walls of the Temple Mount on the right. The western wall is just beyond this hill. And all these big rocks that you see here are rocks that the Romans pushed over the side in the year 70. And that big indentation in the middle of the street is where they hit. Okay? This moment forced transformation. Why? Because without the temple, the meeting point of heaven and earth, as Josephus describes it, the one temple for the one God, how do you continue as a religious community? After all, the temple vessels were taken to Rome. The objects of the temple, you see how sad the computer is. Even the computer is sad that the objects were taken off to Rome, that the temple was destroyed, that the trophies of the Roman Empire were set in the four corners of the temple, right? The destruction of the temple led to the acceleration of a process that had existed before the destruction of the temple. That is what I've called in print the templization, or if you prefer, the mikdashization of Jewish culture, which begins, we find it among the Dead Sea Scroll people, we find it among various communities, the temple as model, the temple as cultural resource. Now, what happened after the year 70 accelerated this process of living with and without the temple. Hence, temple imagery, culture was transferred to other areas of Jewish life. Sacrifice no longer existed. Visit to Jerusalem no longer existed. What do you do when there is no temple? This is a serious question. I was once in the Galilee in Nazareth, in a place called Nazareth Village, with a bunch of my students, and it was the day before the commemoration of the destruction of Jerusalem. It was the day before the commemoration of the destruction of Jerusalem, and we were in this village called Nazareth Village. Anybody been to Nazareth Village? It's really cool. It's sort of like archaeological Jesus land. What they've done is create an alternative, a Protestant alternative to the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth. So they built a more or less accurate village of that time. And I went there with my students. We saw this Second Temple period synagogue reconstruction. We saw the village. We even went into a house where this person dressed as Mary offered everybody olives and bread, right? And left. And I mentioned to my students as we were leaving and asked, what would these people have done the day after the temple was destroyed? What would they do the following tabernacles on Sukkot? Would they go up to Jerusalem? What would they go for? What would they do? What would they do on Passover? A huge spiritual gulf as deep or deeper than the holes in the street created by these rocks. So what do you do? Here we see the temple again. There. The War of Bar Kokhba, 132 to 135, gives us some of the answer, because after all, Hadrian's attempt to build Jerusalem in a good civilized way into a good Roman city led to a second Jewish revolt, which was a kind of intifada, complete with underground tunnels, against the huge Roman armies, and it apparently was a much more complex war than Roman authors would lead us to believe. Well, Mr. Simon, son of Cosiba, later on known as Bar Kokhba, the son of the star, which is why there's a star up there. Mr. Bar Kokhba had a clear message. We're going to rebuild Jerusalem. We're going to rebuild the temple. L'Geulat Zion, for the redemption of Zion. But there's something else. What's going to go on and how does this go on? We have letters that were found in the Judean desert, where Bar Kokhba orders one of his followers to send palm fronds from one place in the desert to another place in the desert because his soldiers needed them because the festival of tabernacles had arrived. In other words, here we are without the temple, with people still taking their palm fronds and shaking them up, down, and around and to the sides, without having the temple, without being in the temple. What Judaism did in the result of the destruction of the temple was take temple imagery, take temple behaviors, but not take the temple and bring them into a kind of living communion while not coming to the position that synagogues were replacements for the temple. If synagogues are like the temple, it's just a metaphor and nothing more. Because after all, there was never this assumption that the temple would not be back.